Then warmly welcome to the IOER Forum today. And it will be a very wild one because we will focus on urban biodiversity and wilderness. My name is Martina Artmann. I am head of the research group of Urban Human Nature Resonance here at the IOER Dresden, and I have the honor to moderate this IOER Forum today. And I'm very happy that we have two very nice presentations. The keynote presentation will be held by Professor Dr. Jürgen Breuste, and the co-referat will be done by my colleague Juliane Mattei. So, maybe you already know Professor Jürgen Breuste. He studied geography at the Martin Luther University in Halle-Wittenberg, and there he got his PhD in 1982 and his second graduation in 1986. He was university lecturer for geography, geoecological, and urban ecology at German universities, such as in Halle, Greifswald, Dresden, and Leipzig. And he was also head of the Department of Urban Landscape at the Environmental Research Center in Leipzig-Halle for 10 years. Then, until last year, 2021, he held a professorship for urban ecology in the Paris-Lodron-Universität of Salzburg, Austria. He holds a honorary professorship at the Capital Normal University in Beijing and also at the East China Normal University in China, in Shanghai. As well, he's also honorary professor at the University of Bucharest in Romania, and he led a range of projects on urban ecology and urban development on European level, but also international ones. He is a specialist in urban ecosystem research, nature protection, and modeling of urban development, and he had many interesting publications. So it's really an honor that you are here, Professor Breuste, and we are looking forward to your talk about their urban wilderness, preserve, use, and manage. The co-presentation will be done by Dr. Juliane Mattei. She is biologist and senior researcher at the IOER. She's focusing on urban ecology as well, and she led also a range of interdisciplinary research projects. And topics are, for instance, urban redevelopment, urban biodiversity, and climate adaptation, as well as the ecological development of urban, open, green, and brownfield spaces on national and European level. And her talk will about wilderness on urban wastelands, any annoyance or a paradise for biodiversity. So let's get wild, and I ask Professor Breuste for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Martina, for this kind introduction related on me. I'm very happy to be here, really, frankly, to see, because I always come home when I come here to IOER Dresden. After a long time supporting this institution in the board. But now I'm not in this function anymore here. I'm here to entertain you with something provocative, of course, because wilderness is something what seems to be the opposite of urban. How can this go together? That's why I wrote there, urban wilderness, preserve, use, and manage, to explain you something about my perspectives and approach to this. It's also a good time to do that now, because on 22nd May is the International Day for Biological Diversity. That's just now in 4 days. And this can be also stay under this headline, Biological Diversity in Cities. I want to present on 6 main topics. You will recognize them during the presentation. This is the role of society and in the city of wilderness. Protection becomes urban. Wilderness, which perspectives people have on wilderness, we need to know. Wilderness and biodiversity in cities. Wilderness old and novel, native and non-native, and urban rewilding, managing, and use. Wilderness. This seems to be really a wilderness. Mr. Albert Bierstadt had produced this wonderful painting of Mount Rosalie, which is in Brooklyn Museum, New York, visible. What we can learn when we see wilderness, what is that perspective he gives us at the beginning or second half of 19th century? Some of my colleagues from social ecology say wilderness is not existing. It is in the mind of people. It is a perspective, an imagination, or something like this. Yes, you can find facts for this. I'm not completely follow this idea, but I'm not ignoring them. This is also important to know, because I think wilderness is also a physical subject, which is by some socio-ecologists discussed, if that is really the case. What we can learn, what wilderness could be, okay. A wilderness, we can look to the Congress Acts of 1964, the USA, and you can partly read the sentence, is an area which is mainly untouched. That was the idea, untouched by humans, without permanent improvement or human habitation. If this is a wilderness, I think we cannot find wildernesses in cities. That means we have to discuss about this approach. If that is the right one, if that is useful one, not right and wrong, but useful or not useful for what perspective. Untouched, self-sustaining, dangerous, yes, wilderness is dangerous, and respect demanding. Some religious people feel something, that wilderness is the expression of something higher. Wilderness creates knowledge, like the National Park of Bayerischer Wald says in Germany. So we are surrounded by a lot of pictures, information about wilderness just now. I would say between idealization, maybe also illusion, myth, and fun, and physical activities to survive. I'm really critical about these different perspectives, because many people every year come to the Alps and die there, because they don't know that the Alps can be wild. And when the weather is bad and when the snow is on steep slopes, you should be careful. So they have no idea of how to behave in wilderness. This year was the highest rate. More than 10 already in this winter died. When we look on cities, then we see the wilderness was that what was destroyed. That was what against what the urban dwellers fight it always. They replace it by cultural landscapes, profitable for them, and they designed new nature. And even the new nature we see here is also no wilderness. There is nothing wild, identifiable when you look at that picture. But when we zoom deeper, you can find something wild, even there. It's more hidden, even there. The modernist architects who designed, like Lucio Costa, Oscar Niemeyer, Brazil, here, for them, wilderness was to fight against, to destroy. The Cerrado in Brazil, no wilderness. The smart cities, which is the upcoming approach now, technology-oriented. I don't know. I'm teaching also in courses about smart cities and 2 other universities still. And I try to bring this idea of biodiversity into this concept, because it is, in my mind, still suffering on that side. The smart city concept. We can discuss about this picture with what a presentation or a conference want to introduce itself doesn't show anything about this wilderness. And then in the 1970s, 80s, Richard Register in San Francisco and the eco-city builders started with nice ideas to bring more green, but not only green, to bring more wild green. You can see that on this drawing into the discussion. Eco-cities, is wilderness here more included? But this was fascinating most for me. In 1919, that's 3 years ago, there was an art installation in the city of Klagenfurt in Austria called For Forest, the unending attraction of nature, a temporary art intervention of Klaus Littmann within a stadium, which was not used by these football interested people in this town, maybe for a longer time. But what we see, is that the wilderness? They brought from nurseries different trees there and put them together and said, this is the wild forest, which people have forgotten. But when you stand there inside of this stadium and look to the other side, then you see the real forest of the Southern Alps, which is partly still existing. So you see, our wilderness idea can be taken by artists and presented by ecologists, by sociologists, and they will be different from each other. Wilderness protection is something what is ongoing during the last 30 years, really powerful on the European level, with the European Nature 2000 network, where wild is protected. The aim is to ensure the last remaining natural, what they understand as natural parts of Europe. This is an interesting idea, but it is targeted clearly to undisturbed and threatened. Undisturbed and threatened. Then they developed the idea, yeah, wilderness is different. We have the bronze wilderness, the silver wilderness, the gold wilderness, and the platinum wilderness. Yeah, very interesting. This is the wilderness, and this must be called wildland, they say. Semi-natural and urban is here. There is nothing related to wilderness. I have added to this drawing, but wilderness elements are definitely there, identified by biologists already. Definitely. Can we work with this gradient, this continuum of human intervention? Is that a good approach? Wilderness seems to have different qualities. This map shows you high quality, low quality. The best wildernesses are far from cities, mostly in mountains. So when we go on with this idea to protect nature only there where no humans and no conflict of interests economically, then we fail. Then we fail, definitely, in my mind. Also a subject of discussion. Wilderness meets urban, at least there where many people live together, and where on the European level also the Nature 2000 concept is working, like in Belgium. A nice example of about 6 million inhabitants in this agglomeration of the north of Belgium, here with the center of Brussels. The Belgium mega agglomeration, this country is 98% urbanized. European level is 72%. 98% urbanized. What is with nature and wilderness in under these extreme conditions where many people live close together? Here you can see that in the spotlight. In between there are Nature 2000 sites. And you remember, the idea was untouched, unused, etc., etc. How to organize this under these extreme conditions? This is a challenge, definitely. 97% of the Nature 2000 areas are located in 10 kilometers radius of the cities, and in many parts of Europe, they are even closer than 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers, or within the cities. They are already there. The question is not if we have to bring them into urban settings, they are already there. And when we look what happens in this specific case of Belgium, then you see the Atlantic acidophilous beech forest is unfavorable bad in Belgium. That means this nature type is under threat. There are only very small remains of this nature. And we can find other examples where we see there is a conflict, of course. You know that conflict between nature and urban. But the problem is not to ignore that conflict. The problem is to manage this conflict. And you can manage that in a cultivated form with parks and gardens. And you can manage that also including into this concept other forms of nature. Not only, but also. Very interesting was this study published in 2010 by Stein, Hücke, Kotten and Neitzke. This is the Naturbewusstseinsstudie in Germany. And they asked more than 3,000 people representative in Germany. Maybe it changed already, but I think it's still valuable. And you see what they expressed, what is in their mind, nature. Nature. These are meadows, these are forests, this is water, these are animals and plants. Meadows, water, animals and plants, and something else. And they created a picture out of this. What is that picture the people have in mind? They reproduced the picture. This is the picture. This is the nature of the Germans in a spotlight in 2009. I think this had to be discussed much more intensive after 2009, but the Umweltbundesamt did not discuss that very much because the idea is a well-maintained cultural landscape where the more rough nature, maybe wilderness, are in the background as a scenery, visible only, nothing more. And there are some deer, and there are some birds, there are some cows, water, meadows, and a little forest. This is that what most of the people understand on nature. Wilderness is not much included into this concept. Why? Order, security, cleanness. These three subjects. Sauberkeit, Ordnung, Sicherheit, SOS. This is that what determines mostly our approach in urban settings, in the surrounding of living spaces of people. And there are many technologies developed to destroy nature which comes by itself in the nearby surroundings. And there is a lot of money invested for this, not to have wild nature. Nature, in that case, mostly plants. But also animals are there. We will later speak about this. Also they had to be fighted, not only the plants, but it's not so easy like here to do this. Here you see two front gardens of a neighborhood in Christchurch, New Zealand. I took the photos there. This is my friend here in front of his garden, and they are really 20 meters in distance from each other. It's the same street, the same size of buildings and gardens. So you see what you can do if you are influencing and managing. You can do this, what he's doing, mostly nothing. That means he let it grow. He let it grow because he liked that, and he explained me what all wild New Zealand specific rare endangered plants are growing in his garden without doing anything. And this is his neighbor. I don't know how friendly they to each other and how they understand each other because they have different concepts. Means also that we cannot say the Germans have this perspective. Maybe some have a different one, yeah? But we can say average or majority or something like this. So there are different lifestyles included. Lifestyle research has to be included when we speak about wilderness in urban areas. I had a research with a master student in the city of Linz, where next to a newly built residential area, there were wilderness and garden architecture, landscape garden architecture, both to reach within 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, food walking distance, you could reach both. And the question was, what of this nature, which is offered to you like a product, yeah, in a shop, what of this offers you are buying? Means you are using. How often do you use this landscape? Yeah, the wilderness as a scenery in the background. I like it. Most people like wildernesses, but they don't use it. And the second, where the processes are more visible than here, the natural processes, I don't like it. So natural processes, not. Scenery, background, yes. I don't use it. Again, 58%, 32%, don't use it. And then more management. On the edge of that Nature 2000 area, here, 17% I use it very often, 31% said I use it often. But when we come to that area here, nicely mowed lawn and benches and trees planted, that means a classical park. 55% very often users and 25% often users. That means nature close to us as more managed, as more liked. People like managed nature. Maybe you have a different idea, but remember you are educated and maybe you're enthusiastic related to nature. We must be careful to take our own idea to the whole society. Here in the IÖR, Mrs. Mattei and the team here had several publications, and thank you very much that you will present after me to this subject. And we can clearly see that pioneer vegetation is not much liked by people, but also not the spontaneous wood or forest vegetation, this structure. Maybe something in between, maybe this, where we have some herbaceous vegetation, some bushes, so a diversity, overlookable area, not too dense. Maybe this is what the research found out. We have to include that people want to profit from nature. You can profit from wilderness in different ways. I showed that with pictures, the physical profiting, I call it. This is hunting, plant collection, gathering, and firewood collection. In many countries, very important. To make use of the wilderness, living at the edge of the wilderness, living within the wilderness, in cities. We can go to India, for instance. I show later examples. The other profiting is emotional profiting. Emotional profiting, people like that. Observing, influencing, building small dams on water streams or something like this, feeding animals, yeah. That means we have different approaches from different social, cultural, societal background in different areas of the world. And also here in our Central European area, we don't like all species who are wild in the city. So butterflies and birds, yes. Foxes, doves, and raccoons, no. Now, ask the people in Kassel, which is the capital of the raccoons in Germany, the hotspot of hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 raccoons living in this city. Why? We don't know. We don't know very much about urban wildlife and urban wildernesses. We are sometimes surprised when we see the wild boars in Izmir, Chidem, or when we see the bears in Brașov, in Romania. And there is research on urban wildlife management. And you can find the locations where observations had been made, which animals are there, how often, etc. they are seen, what they are doing, how people behave. Most of the people think they are pets, and you can feed a bear. And this is, of course, dangerous, or feed a wild boar, which people are doing on the coast, for instance, on Usedom. Learning places. Wildernesses can be learning places. This is the classical form of German-like teaching. Big panels explaining everything, explaining things which are not visible, so that the people get tired to read these long texts. But here, as you see, there are maybe some drawings about birds. This is much better. But you can have other forms of learning from urban wildernesses, like this. I took that photo in Kajalica, in a squatter settlement belonging to Cape Town, South Africa. This is Langa site, official wilderness of the city of Cape Town for initial processing of the Xhosa people. That means young Xhosa have to survive in wilderness for a certain time to become a man. They need that wilderness in the city for this, because the wilderness outside is not anymore existing. It's cultural landscapes surrounded Cape Town, and so they create new wildernesses for this idea, learning to deal with wilderness, to become a man. Sorry, not a woman, but would be nice again also with women. Or to do that, what the Chinese do, present on Chongming Island for Shanghai a wetland and bring the people by buses there, 2 hours drive, then 40 minutes visit, buying some souvenirs and going 2 hours back to the city. That's then the urban wilderness, because Chongming Island belongs to Shanghai. Is that the idea of nature experience, which we can have from wildernesses? Or again, the typical Central European, in this case not a German but an Austrian one, Städten, yeah, these are wildernesses, the Austrian word for this, and Stadtwildnis. So these unmanaged places which you can find somewhere, what they still offer. And this is offered to the people. Yes, learn from this. See what is growing there, who is living there. This is biodiversity. Coming to point 4, wilderness and biodiversity. You all know the 4 types of nature created by Ingo Kovarik in 1992. And here he had a comparison with the wilderness idea. And he shows we have the old remnants of nature 1, pristine landscapes, and we have the novel wild urban ecosystems. Both have a wild, high capacity of wilderness. He called that urban wilderness potential. Urban wilderness potential. This should be, I think, the first approach to the subject, and we can deepen out going from this. Not to forget the other people who are practically working in the IUCN and creating a definition for urban protected area. It's not my term, is UPA, it's a category of IUCN protection. Urban protected area. And there are books about this. What is the specificity of protected areas in cities? I would ask even not what is the specificity of protected areas, what is the specificity of maintenance of protected areas? Because, I will later show you, I cannot imagine that we say, let it grow simply. There must be management when it is with people together. The Marseille-Aix-en-Provence urban agglomeration, with only 1.5 million inhabitants, in international comparison not so big, shows you here where are all these UPAs, urban protected areas. My goodness, you see, this is surrounded by protected areas. It's inside even of Marseille. It's even in the sea, protected areas. How to manage this? How to bring that together with human interests and human behavior? Most of the wildernesses in these urban areas become islands like these. Maybe in the cultural landscapes, they were located outside the urban areas, are growing and growing, and then they find themselves within the urban areas. Maybe here already they started to get protected. But when you have this protected area here, and you have the same area after 50 years maybe here, it's still the same size, but it's very different. It's very different in all approaches and management aspects when it is surrounded by people. And we investigated in the city of Salzburg these small patches, which we also have in Salzburg inside the city. Most of them have not anymore any core area. So they are intensively used. And when you put a buffer around, this green buffer, then you see a lot of land use activities, a lot of other activities inside, and then a small area is remaining. We have to speak about size, shape of these areas, surrounding. And think on that, what on the European level is expressed by Wild Europe, who is authorized by the European Union to deal with the wild subject and publish about wilderness areas should be protected and overseen as so to preserve their natural conditions. How to preserve their natural conditions? Which natural conditions you can preserve under these circumstances? Sometimes we are thinking back. That means forest. From forest we came, forests we have, but these are planted forests. Planted forests. This is like other arable land. Renaturalization or renaturalization can mean bringing the old natural forest back. The island Riede here in Hanover shows you on some places they try to bring the natural forest back in the Stadtwald, in the urban forest. I don't know how effective it is related to the people and their activities. I have no investigation on that and didn't found. But it must be explained. As people don't know what wilderness is, you cannot bring wilderness on a silver plate in their neighborhood and expecting that they are happy with this. This you know, of course. 1935, this area is often published, the Südgelände in Berlin, which wasn't used for a long time, for more than 70 years, nearly 80 years, and this is now the area. No one has done anything. So when we sometimes see the calculation of garden departments, they say how much a tree costs, how much the management costs are these, then these are hundreds, thousands, or even millions of euro, which are not had to be expended for this area. No tree planted. You can wait. Trees will come in most of the places if you like to do. You can simply wait. You must not buy and plant. And you have a high biodiversity. When you count biodiversity only in counted numbers, which is dangerous to do. High biodiversity by doing nothing. Wilderness in the city. Some people who are visiting, I think several, would not say not much, but I don't know exactly how many visitors are there, but several people are happy with this. So best solution, let it grow. But I took a question tags at the end. Cities are rich on species. Many of these species are exotics. Are they all welcome? Cities are richer in species, more native, non-native, and more native, both non-native and native ones. But number of species don't say anything about the survival of species. The number of species don't say anything about the survival of species. Yeah, and this, the raccoon, I don't know if you like that, maybe the robinia, yes. Just now it's flowering with nice smell. We have to shift biodiversity, the biodiversity paradigm, which is already demanded by Kovarik some years ago in cities, including non-natives. Because in many perspectives of nature protectionalists, the nature protection is reduced to native biodiversity, to native species. If we do that, we exclude a big part of wild nature in cities. Yeah, what can you do to bring wildernesses in the city? You can orientate to the historical remnant situation, like here, or to that what is completely new, these novel ecosystems, which are developed in build-up areas after destroying buildings, wasteland, fallow land, etc., whatever we have. Railway areas like this, what I showed you in Berlin on the example. But we have not to forget, there is a threshold. If you are here, you cannot come back here. If you are here, you cannot come back here. That means outgoing from here, have a target, develop a target to restore something. You should not do, because you cannot be successful with this. Outgoing from here, you can do. With the hybrid ecosystems, we have a chance. We see here on this example that all this has a all this has a social dimension, on which we have already spoken: behavior, knowledge, values, preferences. It has an ecological dimension, what I just showed you, and it has additionally a planning dimension, which means wilderness management, interim uses, mitigation of risks, conservation, restoring, initializing of processes, allowing processes, etc. It's quite an interesting subject to develop concepts. This is the easy version of the drawing before. The easy version means we have to include at least the demands of wilderness, the supply of natural elements, and the access to the wilderness. This is something crucial. Just yesterday, I discussed with someone about this subject. Should we have access to these areas, or should we block this access so that the biodiversity can develop best without human influence? You can think about it. I have an idea, of course. The Berlin group around Ingo Kovarik published several nice studies showing that the already protected plant species in Berlin and where they are growing. If it would be enough to protect red list species, plant species, by protected areas, then all the red dots must be in the green area. But it's not the case. It's not the case. You see, red dots are everywhere in the city. And you can see with 37%, you are right. With 17%, they are in hybrid areas, parks, for instance, green areas. With 12%, even in novel ecosystems. That means all these different nature types play a role in protecting and developing biodiversity, not only the remnants of old nature. Also this plays a role. In Salzburg, together with our Polish colleagues, we have investigated on 2 different parks the influence of mowing, on meadows. And you see the vascular flora is highest overall number of species in that area where the mowing is differentiated. Here along the trails and here closer to the tree and bush areas. Most complex taxonomic structure, higher number of phanerophytes, hemicryptophytes, herbaceous species, all Arctic elements, and even ancient woodland plants could be found there. That means such a small change in management has a big effect, has a big effect. And we should not only focus to protected areas. This is the message. Re-establishment of small water streams. Nice subject, of course, actually, because people like, of course, water always. We are creators. The humans are creators. That means we can create nature in a new version. But we should not always look back. We should look forward. That means develop a target and not looking what was it 100 years ago. This is not the most important question. The most important question is what should it be the next 10, 20, 30 years? For what should it serve? Who need that? Who would use that? Etc., etc. This is the Ketcherinbach in Greifswald, and they bring this small water stream on the surface again and create everything new. But with the idea of the past, with the idea of the past, with the idea of the very far past. In Thailand, they have this re-established forest project by a petroleum company financed, the Metro Forest Project. I visit this, and this is the situation of a more or less waste ground, where rubble and building material was placed in 2014. Yeah? This is the Buddhist year, no? We are still not in this. This is 2016. 2016. And this is 2020. A forest, a newly created forest. But they did not went the way as in Berlin, let it grow. They planted specific trees with the idea these were the trees of the former forest there before Bangkok developed. They could have also done nothing. Maybe also forest would have come, but they wanted to have fast results, you see, fast results within 6 years, and they could show it. And it's now with the visitor center and school classes are coming and get introduced into this subject of biodiversity in the city of Bangkok. Rewilding in the Yamuna Biodiversity Park in Delhi, India. What a challenge. If you are surrounding this biodiversity area with thousands or hundred thousands of people living under harsh conditions, what to do there? Leopards even were visited there, coming along the Yamuna river from the north, and by these corridors, they are within the city. People are not happy with this. They were hunting, yeah? And in many cases, I don't know here the specific case, but in general, people kill these animals which they see as risks, for instance. But it's nature, it's wild. My friend Robert Snapp in the Netherlands worked several years on the subject of business sites. How can business sites contribute to biodiversity? How can unused land provide species diversity? How can that be a part of a bigger concept? Well, not only closed up from other land use forms where wild is visible, but interconnected. And there are investigations on different species, because it depends from species, what you can connect and expect that there is maybe a movement of species happening. This was built, of course, for humans first. In Munich, you all know that, 8 kilometers for 35 million euro of the Isar River. It's a nice deal. 35 million euro is not much related to that success, what this area brings to Munich, because this is very well used by the people. They like to have that because they have fun there. And beside that fun and entertainment, there are some areas where also animals and plants can grow under more or less natural processes, but not everywhere. So there is a clear management strategy. And this is the most impressive for me when I was in Dessau last year. No, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Dessau is part of such a group of cities. Frankfurt, Hanover also belong to this, who have this title really of their project, Der Wilderness. Der Wilderness. That means they want to use here fallow land, which was formerly residential land and is now open land. They don't know what to do with this. How we can use that to improve species diversity. And they are not only targeting on this, and later maybe forests, they are targeting on a mixed structural idea to support specific species. And that means to keep some areas immature. The mature areas had to be selected from immature areas. Immature means you're always interventing. And this is the opposite from the beginning, not interventing in wildernesses. Here they intervent in wilderness to have these wasps, for instance, living there on these open sand areas. Open sand areas with gravel from old buildings. Very interesting, high biodiversity, a lot of intervention that trees and bushes should not come on this area. And they have a clear plan what to do where, with what target. There, urban wilderness. Yeah, there are many forms to deal with the wilderness and the wild in the cities. The Wildlife Trust here publish about eco parks. We have the wildlife-friendly gardening as a new approach in gardening activities. We have this small, sometimes small, novel ecosystems developing by itself. This is in Vienna, photographed. And we have this nice idea to identify in residential areas animal added design. Animal added design to identify where we can develop with the building activities and with the open space management, which species together with the targeted humans who should buy these houses or apartments, which species could live with them together, which birds, which lizards, etc., which butterflies. So that's called AAD, animal added design. And wildlife friendly gardening, I have already used this term, designing wildlife inclusive cities, designing wildlife inclusive cities. This is already an ongoing approach to this. There, urban wilderness. Coming to the final, there, urban wilderness. In my mind, I think we should keep in mind 5 important messages. I like to give at the end some messages because what we could have learned, but maybe you have learned something completely different additionally. Don't let order, cleanness, and safety rule everywhere. Don't let it rule everywhere. Offer nature experience, means make wilderness enjoyable, usable, and a knowledge provider. Only when people accept wildernesses, when they have a positive approach to, we can secure them. Without people's support, we will never protect biodiversity in cities. integrate wilderness and wildlife in other nature forms, not only the protected areas, not only the old remnants. Manage wilderness by defined rewilding targets, make targets. Wilderness is a subject of management. You remember the Congress Act from 1964? That's the opposite. Wilderness is a subject of management. Let people profit from ecosystem services based on wildernesses everywhere in the city, not only at the edge of the city and the surrounding 2 hours away, like in Shanghai, from the city. Not only in protected areas. When we do like this, I see some chances to integrate wilderness with the other forms of nature in cities. And just I'm out of scope maybe. If you want to read more about the subject, I can show you the new book which I published just recently about urban wilderness, the wild city, and there are some others to see here. And I'm here as a guest. Thank you very much, Professor Wolfram, that I can be here. And I thought what I can give as a guest to the host on urban and general biodiversity, and I think the birds of Korea could be maybe interesting, that you look which birds you remember still from your time there. I place it here. Thank you very much.
So a warm hello and to you, everybody, also from my side. And we have this, we have heard so much about this nice, interesting wilderness, but where in our cities of today it is possible to have this wilderness. So they are often very dense built up, or there's no space for undisturbed development. So I want to draw your attention on urban wastelands. So what are urban wastelands, how they are defined? That are areas previously used in a variety of ways, now lying fallow, temporarily or permanently. It seems that these areas are unusable or unused, but they fulfill a variety of uses and also so they can also give ecosystem services. So, for example, biodiversity. And I want to go with you through the possibilities they bring for biodiversity. Here you see the first stage of a wasteland, Rebellion and Detmar. They said that there are, when an area falls unused, there can be 4 stages of vegetation development. And so the first is directly after the falling fallow. You just know this picture here. This is the pioneer vegetation. So the first 3 years there are open fragmented rural pioneer populations with short-lived annual species. So, for example, there are special plants. This can be the sticky goose society, or the wallpaper, as you see here, or the sticky and carpon, for example. But in adaptation, there are special animals, for example, the sand lizard or the cracked lark, for example, and other, for example, grasshoppers. They are all adapted to this early stage of development of vegetation. And after some years, that depends how
is the soil, how it was used before? Are there perhaps heavy metal in the ground, or is the ground very dense, or are there rests of buildings? So the time can change, or that can be very different, but around 3 to 10 years, there will be older wastelands with persistent rural vegetation. So the vegetation is closing, and the ground is covered, and there are also single bushes and grooves which can just be higher than 5 meters. And also here we have typical plants, for example, the Weepers bulbous or the mullein flower, and also animals are adapted like the white-throat or the mouse weasel. So then some years later, that can be 10 to 50 years, that there are the rural tall herbaceous vegetation. So there are mainly persistent species, rural tall forbs, bushes, and single groves that are just higher than 10 meters. And here you have also once more the Pepys corpus or goldgrass or the tansy. And the animals that can be the white shed, or when butterflies, the little fox here on a butterfly bush, for example. And if we have the chance that this area keeps still more long undisturbed, then you can have also spontaneous woods. So around 50 years or much earlier, if the conditions are good, you have dense grooves, highly growing herb layers, and in Europe there will develop a typical European wood. There can be sand birch or narrow-leaved willow herb in the ground area, or in the middle area of the plants. Or typical animals, there's a willow warbler and the forest shrew, for example, which can be there if the conditions are for them, so they can develop and live there. So if we have a look on the whole, so you can see sometimes they are very similar to natural habitats. So they can serve as retracts or substitutes or stepping stones, stone habitats for a lot of plant and animal species. And there, for the animals, for example, is it very interesting to have high structures of vegetation, and you have high species diversity. And so very often you have the situation that wastelands go successively grow up. So sometimes in bigger areas of, for example, in old industrialized areas, you have, for example, areas which lie long time fallow. That means that other areas are perhaps not so long. So you have a very different stages of vegetation next to each other. You have just heard that this would be very interesting for the vegetation and also for the animals. But indeed, mostly you have there ruderal vegetation with common species and neophytes. If you just heard, they are not always liked by the nature protection, but often there are also extreme rarities. So there are red list species or species which will not be in the city, in other parts of the city. For example, the calamine violet, which develops on heavy metal grounds. So that is not that what we want in a city, but for this special species that is interesting. So general, we have more diversity than in habitats on the intensive agriculture and forestry, and urban wastelands can so belong to the most valuable areas for species and habitat protection in a city. But you have seen this richness often is only temporary. So we have heard that often the areas which are young, which are pioneer areas, that they can be very worthful for special animals. So you see that perhaps the richness is going away. And on the other hand, we have this the fact that the industry or the use will, another use will come, and so these areas go lost. But not only for biodiversity, these areas are interesting. It was just also pointed out, but we, for example, we looked for the potential cooling effects, which we modeled for some different green spaces and also for urban wastelands. We modeled the difference air temperature in relation to an asphalt covered site, and we modeled it for different times a day. So the most cooling effect of green spaces with medium tree, conoptry, we can reach 2.1 Kelvin on, it is a mean temperature, which for the whole area, not for example, under a tree, it could be much more cooling potentials. And then we have, in comparison, if we have this pioneer vegetation, you can have just 0.4 Kelvin, or if you really have a wood, you also can reach 1.7. It is mostly less than a normal, like green space, because very often on wastelands there are structures from buildings, rest from houses, asphalt areas. So the cooling effects are a little bit less. So then we have the mental and social functions, which have just also been mentioned before. So we have areas for nature experience or for research. Biologists like this areas very much. So you have research for urban ecology, where you can look which plants develop undisturbed, for example, and which birds or other animals develop with them. And there are also areas for environmental education. You can look there, and you can, if you see on the pictures, you can experience the nature without restrictions, like in other parks, for example, where you may not go on the grass or something like this. So you have also, there can also be potential recreation areas. Fresh air can be there if there are a lot of trees, or you have also aesthetical functions, or they also have a local character. If you think, for example, in the rural area, you had a lot of industries, and they are falling unused, and now they have developed woods, and they developed really park area. Yeah, but don't forget that there are also hazards and dangers on urban wasteland. For example, from former industry, there could be tunnels or poisons or house ruins or holes. So it is not only a good area for children to play, for example. You have poisoned soils or toxic plants, for example, not really toxic, but the ambrosia, the ragweed, which causes allergies for a lot of people. And you have also unwished uses. So there are people who sell drugs, for example, or there are homeless people who live there. So that is something where the city administration have problems, how we can manage this. And so these areas also cause distress. So there are fears, there are people are afraid of these areas, and they see it as dangerous. So we are interested, we were interested how people accept or percept the use of urban waste and use urban wasteland. So we made a survey in Dresden here in Germany. So we want to know the potentials of the use of urban wasteland, and we asked people with questionnaires. So 305 evaluable questionnaires came back, and people from 18 to 83 gave their answers. And I only can point out some questions. And for example, we asked, is spontaneous wild nature on urban wasteland worse for preserving? So 32% said yes, but 53% said no. And 15% said, oh, we don't know. And if you look on the age of the respondents, you see that the most who said yes had been in the group of 18 to 35 years, and they who said no were older than 50, and the most are between 50 and 70. So this was one question. Another question was, do you use green wastelands in your residential area? So 28% said yes. In comparison, urban green spaces, the same people said 92% said yes, we use this area. So, and then we asked which kind of use you do. And interesting is that the most said we are having a walk or we are crossing these areas. And interesting is also that there are people who pick flowers or they use it as meeting points. Not often mentioned was the planting or gardening. So I think that is also a problem, because often these areas, yes, they are not allowed to go there. And, yes. Then we asked what wishes for design or use you have. So this was not very surprisingly for me, because we have just heard that so this traditional kinds of green spaces, so green spaces with trees or public parks, are the most the people prefer to have. And also, for example, meadows with flowers which are loved, or with on the other side, this pioneer vegetation is not very much liked. That looks not inspiring for the people. So to sum up our results, we can say for acceptance of urban wastelands, that urban wastelands are perceived ambivalently, and so the negative attitudes dominant, but also clearly positive views are to be seen. The judgment depends on the type of wasteland, in particular density and structure of the vegetation, and unmanaged wastelands with spontaneous wild vegetation, also with wilderness, are often seen as not aesthetic. But many, especially younger, considered that it is worth to be preserved. And concerning the use, the majority of respondents would like to use urban wastelands. In terms of design and use, traditional uses, so green spaces and parks, tend to dominate. And the area size, the character of the area, the accessibility have an influence on the use of the urban wasteland. So I come to my conclusions. The conservation of spontaneous wild vegetation, but also the active regreening of urban wastelands are seen as a valid contribution to climate adaptation, to biodiversity, development into human well-being in cities. So we have just heard that there should be different kinds of green in the city, so there can also be intensively managed parts of urban wastelands, for example. So green wastelands have the potential to buffer climate-related impacts in cities and can be habitats for plants and animals. It is possible to raise wide acceptance for the realization of more unconventional concepts like wastelands with succession areas by partial upgrading and by including residents in the planning process. So when we look at the three things I mentioned at the beginning, so the biodiversity, climate adaptation, and human well-being, there are different things which should be taken under consideration. For example, for biodiversity, it is very good to have undesigned areas with wilderness and spontaneous vegetation, and it would also be good to have some dynamics on and keep this. And for climate adaptation, we have green spaces with mixed vegetation, so structures, so that it's not too dense, but there is a green volume to cool, but also there must be air flow. So it must be possible that the wind goes through, for example. And for human well-being, this perhaps not every time, but sometimes it is good to consider aesthetical wishes and to keep the usability. This was just mentioned, and perhaps that could be also discussed, but I think it should be kept because in the most cities there are not so many green spaces or so many open places where people can be. So this is an alternative to other green spaces. So I thank you for your attention, and then to the end.
Yes, thank you, Juliane Mattei, for this co-talk today. It fit very well to the topic of Professor Breuste. So thanks to both speakers for their presentations.